Okay, I'd now like to introduce Farhad Peerally. He's a senior registrar in gastroenterology at the University Hospitals of Leicester, and he's done extensive research in the practice of serious incident investigations in healthcare and has the intriguing title of I'm going to DATIX you.
First of all, show of hands. How many of you have been involved in a serious incident in healthcare? Okay, keep your hands up if you feel that genuinely your organization learned from that serious incident. Okay, this sets the scene nicely for this talk. Most of you will be familiar with the term DATIX. DATIX is in fact a company that produces risk management software. Unfortunately, in the NHS, not across the world actually, but in the NHS, it has become synonymous with something far more sinister. The blame game, the assignment of blame, often to staff on the front line after the occurrence of an adverse event. So this should be the front title slide. I actually trained in Sheffield and was inspired to do gastroenterology after doing house jobs with Prof. Sanders and Prof. Lobo. One of the reasons why I moved away from Sheffield to Leicester was to take a clinical academic job focusing on patient safety. And my research focuses on the practices of incident investigations in healthcare and what could be learned from other safety critical industries. In the next 8 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about the current issues with how we learn from serious incidents in healthcare and start thinking of a better world, start thinking about how we could do better. So it's actually World Patient Safety Day today. I didn't know that before I accepted to do this talk, but it falls nicely on the 17th of September. But the patient safety movement really gathered pace and got going about 20 years ago. In 1999, the publication of the US Institute of Medicine's To Is Human document on your right was a watershed moment in healthcare. Several points were made. It focused on patient safety. Medical errors were common. Medical errors were costly. But more importantly, medical errors could be prevented. The UK's patient safety movement had its own watershed moment. The publication of an organisation of the memory. That was in 2001 by the then UK CMO, that was Prof. Sir Liam Donaldson. One of the key recommendations was improving incident reporting, but more importantly, learning. The concept of learning from an incident, on the face of it, may seem simple enough. An adverse event would occur, a staff member would report it, someone else in a position of power would investigate it and come up with a mitigation plan, and the organization would learn from it. With a GI lens, let's first focus on the types of incidents that may occur in gastroenterology. There isn't a lot of data out there on the different types of incidents across the whole spectrum of work we do in gastroenterology. But there's more work focused around endoscopy. You'd be familiar, some of you would be familiar with the work of Manmeet Mataru et al. From London, reporting a single center observational study looking at 147 endoscopic procedures, and they actually observed 140 patient safety incidents, up to 15% of them with potential or actually delivering patient harm. The types of incidents were wide and varied, ranging from issues with technical skills, non-technical skills, and patient monitoring mostly. How about the investigative process and the contributory factors or reasons that lead to those incidents? Well, one particularly common approach used to investigate incidents is root cause analysis, RCA, as many of you would be familiar with. RCA encompasses a toolbox of techniques that addresses three facets of an incident being investigated. A description of what happened, so it's a narrative description, an investigation of why it happened, this is where skills comes in, and how it and similar problems can be prevented from happening again. This is where nothing comes in, because it happens again. When it comes to the identified contributory factors from incidents, there again isn't much data that is GI specific. But we do have data looking at cross-organizationally across multiple departments. In this study, we reviewed completed serious incident investigation reports over 3 years using qualitative methodologies from a single center, and the story was pretty much the same as those from other published studies from Australia and the US. Factors at the organizational level contributing to incidents are rarely identified. The focus really is on the blue bit of this pie chart. Unsafe actions or errors on the front line. US malpractice claims data echoes a similar story, with the bulk of identified contributory factors being very much on the individual, as can be shown on this table here. How about the outputs of investigations? What are the types of recommendations that comes out of investigations? This is what I'd, during the rest of his talks, as risk controls. Well, there's a hierarchy, first of all, that you need to be familiar with. This is quite familiar with people who've worked in other safety-critical industries. Interventions proposed following incidents can be categorized according to it. This hierarchy follows a simple principle. Actions which do not require human intervention and automatically eliminate risks are actually most effective, while those which require human interventions, so things for us to recall, remember, are the weakest at mitigating risk. This is what aviation and other safety-critical industries actually use. In our UK single-centre study of risk controls generated over 3 years, looking at 126 serious incident reports, our findings painted a bleak picture. Again, similar to what's been shown elsewhere, with the majority of risk controls being weak, to the far left of your graph here, echoing the results of other studies in Australia and the US. So the big question here is whether those risk controls, which we are deeming on the face of it as weak, whether they actually lead to improvement. In this retrospective review of multiple serious incidents in the US, the authors reported that the most common solution types were weak, as we've noted, such as retraining or policy reinforcement, and more importantly, they've longitudinally studied whether they led to any reduction in serious events, but no, there was no reduction in serious events. So much effort and resources is going into all of these investigations, with next to no improvement being shown at the other end. A lack of improvement in safety following serious incident investigations can be broken down to multiple reasons. In this review article, we summarize multiple such issues, but in the interest of time, I'd like to draw your attention to 5 of them. Poor quality investigations, the tension between trying to develop a blame-free approach and assigning accountability, lack of feedback to staff leading to a disenchantment with incident reporting, and poor quality risk controls. The end result is what was meant to be a simple enough concept and process is in fact far more complex and sinister, with the perpetration of poor investigations, weak risk controls, blame, with the only legacy of an adverse event being the adverse event itself. So the status quo clearly isn't effective nor sustainable. We need to think of a better reality, of a better future, and I thus propose 3 key determinants that have been shown in other safety-critical industries and in healthcare for better learning following adverse events. Psychological safety, expertise in investigations, and the democratization of learning. I'll expand on this in the next 3 slides. Nobody describes the importance of psychological safety better than this chap here, Martin Bromely. He's a commercial airline pilot. Many of you will know him or the work that he's done. He's grown to become the founder of the Clinical Human Factors Group. And since he's gone through a tragedy in 2007 of losing his wife after a routine ENT operation. And since then, instead of going on a vendetta against healthcare, he's campaigned for improved safety in healthcare. I'll let you read this quotation from him. Unfortunately, the culture in healthcare is that we fear incident reporting, as it can be used as a disciplinary tool against us or others. The phrase, "I wouldn't hesitate to DATIX X, Y, or Z," gets thrown about as a threat willy-nilly by people in positions of power. There's clear evidence, however, as shown in this recently reported study in the US, that the implementation of interventions aiming to improve psychological safety of staff encourages reporting and consequently, over time, leads to a reduction in serious adverse events. The current state of play in healthcare means that safety investigations are led by clinicians with a part-time role in safety who also happen to be employed by the department where the incident happened. A better reality is for investigations to be conducted by investigators trained in the safety sciences with a working knowledge of healthcare, similar to what happens in aviation in the AAIB, in the NTSB, National Transport Safety Board in the US. In the UK, independent, expert-led investigations at a national level is starting to become a reality. This organization, the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch, has been conducting national investigations of mostly maternity incidents, and they've found some major recommendations addressed to not to staff on the front line, but to organizations. They address systemic issues. They've recruited massively into other safety-critical industries, so they are prioritizing safety sciences over actual clinical sciences, but they also have a full staff of clinical scientists as well as healthcare scientists. In the interview study I conducted as part of my PhD, it's yet to be published, one of the most commonly used methods of disseminating learning was M&Ms and email dissemination. Staff found them to be ineffective. M&Ms were poorly attended. As a community of practice, we need to think about how we improve learning. And for that, there are modalities that we can use. These would include simulation of adverse event, focusing on cases with generic learning, and JAG have been particularly good at that with the creation and publication of a case of a month, which provides a broad selection of endoscopy, mostly related safety events, and the learning that can be had from them. But we also need to think about more rapid recycling of learning following the occurrence of an adverse event. This is what we call rapid RCAs. A recent publication in Endoscopy International Open talks about that with a gastroenterology focus, with local debriefs after the occurrence of an adverse event, as opposed to waiting for it to be fully investigated and be debriefed 2 months down the line. So we need to think about more timely and blame-free learning. So in conclusion, I've shown you that our current processes for learning from past incidents are flawed, and a better reality would include the adoption and adaptation, more importantly, of some practices from other safety-critical industries. These would include psychological safety, expertise in investigations, and the democratization of learning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Can I invite questions from the floor?
Thanks, Farhad. I think as consultants, we spend a lot of time dealing with DATIXs and responding to them. And often as a junior consultant, you find it very daunting. Do you think as registrars and as medical students, there should be something built in the curriculum for them to learn at the start?
I fully agree. Thank you very much for that question. So Dr. Taufik's asking whether we should be increasing the amount of learning from right from med school in terms of how investigations occur, how patient safety occurs. And I'm pleased to say that most medical schools do have a human factors module now. This would be one way. The other way would be to invite junior doctors and staff on the front line to investigation meetings. And these do happen. So you can get in touch with your patient safety team and ask for representation. I've got to say, though, that the reality is that it doesn't happen in real life. So our data shows that only 2% of investigations were attended by anyone without a position of power.
Thank you very much. So we'll now move on.